Always takes me a minute to figure it out. I think we're
Alex,
live.
have you been playing drums lately?
Yeah, a little bit.
Nice.
Cool.
Yeah.
I think we're live.
I was actually
Sweet.
playing bass just before we got going.
Awesome. I'm getting like 50 different audios because I've got like 4 different systems going on. Sweet. Awesome. Hello, everybody. How's it going? Can everybody hear us and see us and comment in the chat if you can? So we should be, some of you should be here from yesterday and the day before. My hope is that you have. If you're not, welcome to the week-long furniture design and manufacturing kind of workshop that we're hosting. Basically, this week is dedicated to those who are into furniture design in the industry. Maybe they're scaling their business or anything like that. It's just essentially us to show you how we use Fusion 360 to either drive our designs in for furniture or actually ship products to customers. We've been hearing from a lot of you that this has been really helpful and informative, so I'm super excited about that. For those of you who are returning, this will be kind of a continuation of the last 2 days, but if this is your first time, go and check out the last 2 days videos. They're live on YouTube. You can watch them whenever. The first one starts out pretty basic. It's jigs and fixtures and how to use joints and assemblies and a little bit of parameters we actually make a taper jig for a number of different table saws, which anybody who does furniture knows that jigs and fixtures are like your best friend. And then day 2, we actually did a deep dive into parameters. Now, obviously, parameters is as infinitely deep as you want it to be. So I think we did a pretty good job covering some stuff. But if there's anything that was lacking, give us a shout in the chat. I'll write it down and we'll totally try to keep these going so that we can answer questions. But today, we're kind of stepping back and looking at the design process. We kind of started with the making process. And what I wanted to do is actually spend a day to talk about kind of what it's like to use Fusion 360 to do more organic design or work more along the lines of a traditional industrial designer, right? Like what happens if I make a sketch or I do a render in my sketchbook? How do I get that to fruition? How do I actually get it from ideation to completion? And today I'm hosting with Alex Lobos and Kaching Song, and I'm super excited to have them on. So for those of you who are joining for the first time, I'm Trent. I work for Autodesk, but I also have a furniture manufacturing and design business in San Francisco. Been making furniture for about 15 years. My background's in architecture, engineering, and advanced manufacturing. And I'm actually going to hand it over to Alex and have him introduce himself.
Hi, everyone. So good to be with you today. Thanks for the invite, Trent and Kaching. So I'm Alex Lobos. I'm an industrial designer. I'm a professor and grad director of industrial design at Rochester Institute of Technology. I've also been working with Autodesk, as a collaborator for, wow, maybe way too long. But, we were actually lucky to start playing with Fusion 2 years before it was released to the market. And that was, so fun because we really got to understand, the power and the potential of the software and work with the, development team. Ever since, we use it all the time. I use it in my, own design practice. I do a lot of furniture, a lot of lamps, a lot of, very interesting sculptural designs, and I see how my students use it in a wide array of applications. So it's a great tool for creating very interesting shapes, and then a lot of cool paths for fabricating and machining, manufacturing your designs. So we'll get to talk about some of that today. So thanks again for joining us.
Okay, Trent's muted, but it's fine. Hey, Alex, so good to have you. Hey, everyone. I think, I'm really excited to be on this live stream with you guys. A little bit about myself. I'm Kaching Song. I am the Fusion 360 community manager. I've been at Autodesk since 2012, just about when Fusion 360 launched. I was on the product management team. I worked very closely with Alex. Alex actually is kind of underselling himself. He's done a lot for Fusion 360. he used Fusion 360 when it was called Project Forge. That is name drop right there. If you guys, for those of you who know Project Forge, you've been with us for a long time. So again, very excited about this. We've got a lot to show. So yeah, Trent, how do we do this?
Awesome. Yeah. So I'm going to go ahead and give us a little bit of an overview. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And for those of you who have been here all week, you should be seeing the credenza we've been chatting about all week. Now, one of the things that Kaching and Alex and I have talked about in the past, and they brought it up, and I think is a perfect example of, kind of the power of these types of tools is, well, so we have this credenza. And in Lahoma, for instance, we have a product line of about 15 pieces. And our whole entire business is essentially consumer-driven manufacturing and customization. So we can customize and iterate and as fast as we can. But what happens is when we start to develop a collection, we have to start thinking of how does it play in kind of line or conjunction with everything else we're doing. So Kaching and Alex had an awesome idea of kind of, well, what would we do to make the credenza a piece of a collection? So today what we're focusing on is essentially these kind of more organic shapes. And we spoke a little bit about the wave face yesterday in regards to parameters and using surfacing and sketches to parameterize that. But today we're going to actually be in the Sculpt environment. And the Sculpt environment, I think, is super slept on. Like, I don't think people use the Sculpt environment as much as they should. And I think that this is going to be a pretty good tutorial / walkthrough for folks who are interested in knowing more. So when we start talking about kind of organic forms, none of these things are panelized, right? They've all got shapes, they've got curves, they're really kind of flow into each other. Even when we move over to the legs, and I've got actually separate one pulled up here, you can see that when we start to look at it, there's symmetry, but it's not like the top view, for instance. The top is smaller than the bottom, and the Sculpt environment really starts to empower your workflow to look into things like this. And it also allows you to do stuff like this. This was a generative chair that we did a couple years ago. We actually manufactured this. We put it on our 5-axis DMS. We made it out of solid walnut. It was a super fun project. But the wonderful thing about the Sculpt environment is that a lot of the times you might think that these things aren't editable or you don't have a lot of control. And actually, that's why I asked Alex and Kaching to come on today, because the truth is that you can do things like this, or you can do manufacturability at scale in things like this. And so I'm going to hand it over to these two. I'll be in the chat fielding questions. Let us know if a workflow is interesting to you or if it's helpful or whatever, and I'll field those. And today's going to be a little bit more conversational between Alex and Kaching, instead of just like hardcore, like I'm going to apply a joint here and I'm going to fillet this. We're going to really talk about the kind of iterative process of industrial design in furniture manufacturing and design. So handing it over, let me stop sharing. I'm going to hand it over to you guys, and I'll be in the chat.
Oh man. So, okay, that's great, Trent. Thanks for introducing that. I just want to say, when I started working at Autodesk on the Fusion 360 team, I didn't know Fusion 360 at all. Like, it was brand new to me. And I come from a SolidWorks background, and I really did not enjoy that whole workflow. But the Sculpt and organic modeling side of Fusion was really I would call it my first love. It was what got me into Fusion 360 and pulled me into this side of modeling. So I'm like really excited talking about this. Let me share my screen and let's jump in here. Before we get started, just something that Trent showed earlier, that chair, that's a point where you can get to in Fusion 360 with generative design, but you can also get to something like this. This is the Zaha Hadid Mesa table, famous architect designed this table. This actually was designed by our UX designer, Jake Fowler, in 2013. This was made, he basically modeled this in 2013 with one sculpt body. Okay, so you can get to this with just sculpt. So it just depends on how much time you want to spend in sculpt. So just want to share that example. give you some
and
inspiration.
Kaching, let me expand on that, because I feel that one of the things that for me was so exciting and eye-opening about Sculpt was that you can think in real time. And what I've noticed is that when you more traditional parametric design, you have to start with a sketch. So you already have an idea of what you want, which is normally a 2D view of the design, and then you create an operation that extends it into a third dimension. So from the very beginning, you already have an idea of how something might look like at the end. And one of the cool things about Sculpt, and Fusion 360 is that you can literally, react to how the geometry is changing. So, for example, in that, table that you see there, a lot of the connections in the middle, my guess is that those were completely open, and there was some idea of, yes, I want some connections, but there wasn't a sketch, there wasn't a real connection there. It was just selecting faces, and then Fusion connects them in a very elegant way. That's what you react to. So I feel that that is the power of Sculpt, that you don't need to go in with a predetermined idea of what you want to do. It's just a general sense, and then you start playing, exploring, connecting shapes. And that's what makes it very cool.
Absolutely, totally. I can't agree with you more. Let me go back to this. Okay, so we're focusing on this product line, right? And Trent said, hey, let's look at how we created these, the armrest and the what do we call this? This is I don't even know. What do we call this again? The footrest, I guess. I don't know. The ottoman. Ottoman. So how do we get these shapes, right? How can we get here? So what I've done is I've created 3 what I call sculpt bodies. Let's just say sculpt bodies. They all look slightly different, but they all come from a slightly different workflow. So I'll show you how I approach these bodies. This one is with a sketch spline and pipe tool. This one is with a Taurus tool, and this one is with a box. So I'm going to show you from scratch how do I get to these shapes. So I'm going to start a new design here, and then Alex, Trent, as you guys get questions or have comments, feel free to holler and jump in here. Okay, so I'm gonna go through this. One of the things that I think industrial designers and just designers in general do a lot is we like to sketch. We like to take photos of reference images. We like to grab screenshots, and that is a great starting point if you need some kind of content to refer your design to. I think that's Alex. That's what you did with your chair, which you can show, I think, later once I get through this.
Yeah, definitely.
But in the insert tool, there's a command called insert canvas, and insert canvas allows you to attach any image file, JPEG, PNGs, TIFFs, into your design canvas. So I've already uploaded a PNG here, which was a screenshot of the Alex lounge chair, and I'm gonna select a plane, and it's gonna come in. I'm just gonna resize this using this manipulator. So this is kind of the resize manipulator. And we're going to go more in detail on what these manipulators do. Each of these have a slightly different modification. So this is kind of a let's see, ZX resize, right? This one is just your Z. This one is just your X. So some of these manipulators are constrained to a certain axes. So I'm going to undo. Actually, I won't. This is fine. So you can also in this area, you can also calibrate, like in terms of how big this canvas needs to be. I'm not going to worry about that right now, but you can go to here, right click and say calibrate. So under your canvas section, there's a calibrate tool. And this is where you can put 2 points and say, hey, I want this to be, I don't know, 6 feet, right? And that calibrates that distance to that scale. So now you're designing in that scale. So it's a nice little tip for you guys to design to scale. Okay, so let's get to the shapes. I'm gonna go to create form under the solid tool, solid tab. Create form is where you're gonna spend most of your time if you're gonna do a lot of the sculpting. And when you click on create form, we're gonna explore some of the we call primitive bodies here, like box, torus, and pipe. And so let's start with a pipe, because if you look at this shape, yeah, you could make this into like a kind of like use a pipe as a skeleton, use a sketch as a skeleton, and use the pipe tool. So I'm gonna go to create sketch and then go to spline. I'm gonna use a control point spline, and I'm just gonna start laying out some control points like this. And then we click on the X, and now I've got somewhat of like a rough shape of this the feet. And finish sketch. I am now going to the pipe tool, and clicking on the profile I just made, it's gonna make a pipe. Now these are, if you notice, these faces are tiny, so I can actually make this bigger. Global diameter. Let's make this bigger. Okay. And a lot of times, like Alex said, this all happens in real time. So you're kind of playing, you're playing with the shapes, you're playing with the scales, you're trying to see what looks best. Here, display mode, I'm going to turn it to like smooth display. So now, okay, it's looking a little bit better. Now, one tip with T-spline, and I think Alex, you can also chime in here. There's a lot of faces, there's a lot of edges, and the more faces and edges you have, the more control you have over your model. But it also means you got a lot of things now you got to manage. You got a lot of edges you got to manage, a lot of faces you got to manage. So the rule of thumb with T-splines is if you can get away with the least number of edges and faces as possible without really impacting your overall shape that you want, that's the best. That's the best way to go.
Totally. The less geometry that you have, the easier that it is for you to to control it. But
Yeah.
I will bring it to the next step, which is one of the things that any CAD program does best is creating efficient solutions. And for example, if you have two faces that you need to connect, and you want to do it, in a very natural, very, in a way that's very, has a lot of flow, a lot of continuity, the computer is gonna do it, to be honest, way better than you. So a lot of times I like to keep, the geometry simple, and then I let Fusion, make some of these connections. So, some of the things that you're seeing with the shape of the legs, if you look at the wireframe drawing, you see that they have very few facets.
Yes,
and it's
yes.
exactly because of that, because Fusion connects things, Fusion is thinking, I'm connecting them very efficiently. You as a human are saying, that looks beautiful. So what is efficient for the computer, for you, feels very appealing, in terms of aesthetics and appearance.
Yeah. Great point there. And like Alex said, like if I delete this edge, see how this face now kind of smooths out. And if I delete this one, it smooths out even more. If I delete this one, now it's like almost flat. So this is the level of control these faces are giving to you. But sometimes you don't need those edges, right? You can just kind of tweak them and get rid of them to see how this model behaves. So, this is close to the shape that I want, but here there's some angular, somewhat angular here. So what I did here, I was doing it really quickly. Let me just do that again. I'm going to right click on a face and click and select edit form. So edit form is the main tool that you're going to use to tweak a lot of these faces. And this now shows the manipulators that we saw earlier, right? And this is where these manipulators come that become really important. And I think this is where a lot of us who are coming into this new tend to get confused and get a little confused of what each of these things do. So these manipulators, they're kind of in a 3D plane here. But it corresponds to your origin planes, right? Like these basically are constrained to the Z, Y. If you move over here, these manipulators are constrained to your Y, Z. So it corresponds to your origins. And depending on what you do to them, it manipulates these faces according to those constraints. So this basically is a free moving manipulator that lets you tweak this face along the plane. These manipulators here are scale manipulators. So this scales it along this plane, big or small. This kind of scales it only on a I think Z plane. Okay, so you can kind of see how that behaves. These are rotational manipulators, so it rotates this face. If I go over here, it rotates it on this plane. And then same with these rotate. So once you play with these and start to get familiar with them and what each manipulator does, then you start to get a sense of, okay, which one do I use? Which one is best for certain cases? This middle one is a global scale. So this is going to scale it in all three axes. So this is going to scale it basically X, Y, and Z.
Hey, Kaching.
Yeah.
Actually, there's so someone who's been a part of the live stream all week, Ethan, has been really has been having awesome questions. And he actually brings up something that I think would be really good to show here is, how do you know how many cells to start with? And in my opinion is that you kind of start with the fewest possible that you can get away with. Yeah. But I do think it would be really, I think that there's a lot of ways to do it, but there is an opportunity to show like basically display modes, right? So if you have a lot of cells, but maybe too many cells are freaking you out for someone who's just starting, editing in block mode, I think is like a perfect opportunity for those who aren't super used to sculpt environments to get a little bit more comfortable to start with it. Because it seems like from the chat, a lot of folks are here because they're really interested in using this, but they haven't, which to me is an awesome opportunity to show. And then I think when you get to Alex's level, it's like you're kind of starting with as many as you can have, because then you get that mass customization, right? You can get in there, you could add like a finger divot or a grip or something, right? So I think it's choose your own adventure, but if you could show block mode or any, just the display modes, that would be awesome.
Let me throw in an analogy in there that I use a lot. I think that's going to help, everyone, Ethan, definitely. Think of using splines as driving in a highway. If you are going in kind of a straight, direction, like many times you can let go of the steering wheel. You don't need as much direction. So imagine that as I need less points because, the lines are just moving. Anytime that you get closer to an intersection because you need to make a turn, you actually, grab on the, steering wheel, and then you need to give more direction. So that's, I feel, a good way of thinking of Tsplines. Whenever you have smooth surfaces, you can remove a lot of segments. Whenever you are getting to connection points or corners, where the geometry is going to change, that's where you need a little bit more input.
Yep. That's a great shout. Yeah, Trent. So this is kind of what I'm showing here. Under the select options, there is a display mode option where you can toggle between box display, kind of hybrid control frame and the smooth, or just smooth. And this is your also shortcut key, Control 1, Control 2, Control 3. So you kind of do this on the fly, right?
Yeah, and can you turn the sketch off so people can see how the lines? So if you turn the sketch off and then he goes to block mode, you'll see it like kind of this. Like that looks crazy, right? But you're able to start to be able to just visualize those in a more kind of modeling space like mentality. So if you're just getting into Sculpt, play with Sculpt, but then turn on these different display modes, because I think that you'll see like, oh, I see how we got there, and this is how I can edit it. So thanks for doing that.
Yeah. Good shout. The reason why this face is wonky is because I only selected one face and not the other side. That's why you see this slant. But that I would definitely recommend having box mode turn on when you're trying to do this. So yeah, that's great. Okay, I'm gonna show the other one. So we talked about spline and pipe. Okay, the other one is let's see. We go to create here. Taurus. Okay, so yeah, Taurus is another primitive shape, right? But this one it does exactly what it sounds like it does. It makes a torus. So it depends really on like what is more comfortable for you. Maybe a torus is a better starting point here. And like, all T-splines, the technology that's kind of under the hood here, like all T-splines bodies, you can add the number of edges here. You can add faces, diameter 2 faces. So you can add and remove as many edges as you want, but typically I would start with like the default number and see how much I need later. So here, again, going back to the edit form tool, I can start manipulating these, start pulling these out, scaling these down, and really starting to get a shape that I think would work in a certain application. So this looks different, but this might also be a desirable shape for something else. So again, in T-splines, you can select faces, you can select edges, you can also select points like vertices here. And so there's a lot of things you can manipulate, and they all have to do with kind of their area of influence. If I select a face, it's going to influence all the other faces around it because it's a big piece of geometry. If I select an edge, it's also going to influence some, but now it doesn't influence as many, right? And if I select a vertex, now you can see how much this manipulation is influencing the rest of the body. So that's another level of like what piece of it do I select? That's another level that I think as you get more into this, you start getting a hang of like, okay, maybe I should select this vertex instead of this face altogether. So that's just another thing to point out.
And keep in mind that at this stage, you are really exploring shapes. So yeah, I mean, you can get deep into the weeds and think about, well, is this the right transition? Do I have the right filter? Am I better off with a vertex, a vertex versus a point or a face? At this point, you are just playing with general shapes. One of the things that's wonderful about Fusion is that right now, when you see Kachin moving faces, like he's modeling in real time, that was the power that I was talking about. He can make decisions and say, oh my gosh, this looks great, or no, like this needs to be wider here. Maybe I need to move this to the top. And the other thing that I love about Fusion is that you see that the surface continuity is spot on. At any given point, that shape is looking nice and smooth. Imagine trying to do that if you were creating splines individually, and then you're trying to connect them, with a loft or, any other surfaces, tools. It will be so hard to make all of this work. Because again, you have to pre-plan for it ahead of time instead of just reacting to how the shape is changed.
Yeah, for sure. I just turned on the zebra analysis earlier. So there's an analysis type called zebra analysis. And what this does is it lays these stripes, hence zebra analysis, onto the surface that shows you any breaks in surface continuity. If there's a break, you should see like a jagged edge. But like Alex said, there's no disconnect or break here. These stripes are all connected. So yeah, it's a good way to look at if you've got like breaks in your surfaces. Okay, so going to this box, right? How do you turn a box into this shape or into this shape? Let's explore that. So there's other tools in T-splines that help you get the shapes that you want. One of the great tools is symmetry. You can essentially say, okay, I want this face, this side to be symmetrical to this side. And now everything I do on this side is going to give you a symmetric result on the other side. So you can see how that other side is behaving. It's selected the other side, and whatever I do on this side is replicated on the other side. So that's great. Okay, we like that. So the other thing that is useful to know is kind of like a hidden, somewhat of is not as discoverable, but once you know, you know. So when you hold down the Alt key on your keyboard and you say use this global manipulator. Now it's going to add additional faces while rescaling these faces. So if I don't hold the Alt key and I rescale this, it's just going to rescale these 4 faces, right? That's all it's doing. It's rescaling in this global scale. Now, if I hold down the Alt key and rescale, notice what just happened. It's rescaling, but it also added all these faces around it. So the Alt key adds additional geometry to your T-spline body. And that's really powerful. That's how you get something like this from just a starting shape, because these are all geometry that's been added while you're sculpting, right? So I did this because what we want to do now is we're going to punch a hole through this. And you could delete these faces and then, like, I guess, add more faces to it. But another great tool you can use is Bridge. Bridge tool doesn't just bridge faces together. It also punches holes. So what I'll do, I'll use the Bridge tool. I'm going to select these 4 faces as side 1. I'm going to turn it over and then select these 4 faces as side 2. Okay, so now both sides are selected. There's some options here where you can preview. You can change the number of faces. Here, I'm going to actually give it to 2 faces because I don't want that many faces, right? And then you can maintain crease edges. We're going to leave all that. But we're going to say, okay. Well, once you do that, boom, now there's a hole right in the middle. And the 2 faces come into play when, say, there's 1 and 2. Those are 2 faces. So now you've got a shape that you can start manipulating. And the other tip here that's good to know is, see these faces? These are all kind of like a continuous loop, right? Whenever you have a continuous loop of faces or edges, you don't have to like hold shift and then select them one by one. You can just click one and then hold shift and double click, and that selects the whole thing. You don't have to do it one by one. So that's a nice little like productivity tool. The other thing, the same thing goes to edges. If you select this guy and then double click on this, it should, because we have symmetry turned on, that's why I didn't select the whole thing. But here we go. There you go. You just double click on one edge. If it's continuous, it selects the whole thing. But for faces, you kind of have to hold down the shift key. So, okay, I'm going to do that and then edit form. And this is where I'm going to start like pulling these edges in with the manipulators, right? And you can now start to see like what, how it's behaving. And it really just shows like once you get a hang of these manipulators, this is where you can really start to experiment with some of these geometry. Alex, any thoughts here? Any comments? Are we getting any questions?
I think that people are blown away with your awesomeness. Modeling.
Yeah, awesome.
Yes. But no, I agree. I think that this is something very powerful. One of the things that I actually love to do is once you have a general shape, you can start playing with transitions. So, for example, Kachin, can you double click on the center, one of the center rings? No, sorry, on the opposite direction. Like when you showed how to select a loop.
Oh yeah, like this.
No, but on the edges.
Oh, on the edges. Oh, like this.
So now, if you start playing with with the center orbit in there to play with proportions.
Oh, this guy like this.
So that gives you a way of of controlling. Now, let's say that imagine that the top section you want to make that thinner at the very top, so you can select the top ring. Just the center edge, Kachin. Well,
like that.
you keep doing your thing. No,
Okay.
it's on the perpendicular axis. You keep choosing the XY axis. It will be
Oh, okay, okay. Okay. It's so funny because it's hard to like follow what you're telling me to do, without like you showing me. But anyway,
yeah, no, I hear
yeah.
So one of the things that's come up a couple times in the chat is like, using bridge to make a hole, but also like, what would it be like to deploy, crease, or like some people are like, I like this organic shape, but I want a little bit more control over the tangency, and you can't really get a ton of tangency options around that in Sculpt, but you
Right.
can start to mess with crease a little bit in conjunction with some of the other tools. So maybe you want to show a little bit of the modified tools, because I think if you do go back to the data set that we had for the Ottoman and you really zoom in on that particular instance, you can see that some of those edges are really sharp, right?
Yeah,
And then
right.
there's like nice organic subtlety on the inside. And
Yeah.
I think kind of covering that, how do we get to that point, would be really valuable.
Yeah, for sure. Let me go back to this because I think this is a little bit easier to show. Let's look at this tool right here, right? Say that I want the bottom here a bit sharper. Yeah, you can go to the crease command and let's say, okay, I want that. I want these edges creased here, and here. Okay, so now see how like those edges are now a little more creased than the others. And let's say okay, and then let's like also flatten these a bit more, so I can select that edge, and let's bring this up, right? And then the other good thing to know is sometimes like if you find your edges a little wonky, like not exactly straight, click on one of these like manipulators along the plane that's constrained to, and then move it, give it a 0. And sometimes that zero will make it a lot flatter than the previous shape. So that's just like another as the more you do it, the more these are kind of like pro tips that you can try. Like here, see how I'm bringing that all the way down to 0. Now that edge is way straighter than before. So now you've got some kind of like a crease there. I hope that showed it well.
And crease gives you this really sharp edge. The other thing that makes it very cool is that you see that Kaching only shows the edges at the bottom. So then anything that extends kind of fades away the crease. So you can see that in this case, this leg, as it's moving up, it's moving from a very sharp intersection to a more smooth surface. Another way for you to control some of that sharpness, if you don't want to use crease because maybe that is too sharp, is that you can also add edges.
Yes.
So for example, if you select all of that perimeter that Kaching was working with, and then you go to modify and then insert edge, then you can add a new line of edges, and that helps to work with some of the curvature. So
yeah, see that? I just added another edge there, and it made just that angle just a little bit more angular. So again, that goes back to this idea of the more geometry and the more edges you have, the more control and the more you can define a certain shape. But maybe you don't want that. Maybe you do. So that's just things that you can play with of what you how you want your shape to look like.
Kaching, I don't know. Do you want to show bridge connecting two different bodies? Because I think that might start bringing, these ideas back to the base that we did for the.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so let's go back to this real quick, and let me turn off this base. Okay, we're at 1139. That's fine. And notice how like this base that we made isn't necessarily connected to the post. It looks good, but it's not connected to the post. So one thing that we can do, we talked about bridge punching holes, but bridge can also connect faces as what bridge is good at doing. So I'm going to go to the sculpt body, which is this guy, go to edit, and because Alex had previously already turned on symmetry, this like all four sides are symmetrical. See this line, this green line, basically left and right is symmetrical to each other, and then also the width wise is also symmetrical, which is really handy if you want everything symmetrical. So I'm going to zoom in here and then go to modify bridge again. I'm going to click on these two faces as side one. I'm going to rotate around, go to this over here, and then click on these two faces. Okay. And it's giving us a little preview of what that would look like in box mode. Okay, that's cool. I'm going to increase the face to like 5, just so I have some additional edges to work with if I need to manipulate it. And then I'm going to click OK. And now it made the bridge, essentially. It connected those faces. And, now with edit form, I can go in here, select these faces, and start to play with these shapes a bit more. Maybe we want them a little thinner, right? So go to a different view, bring them in a little. And the options are endless here. You can really fine tune to exactly the shape that you want. But now we've got a surface for these posts to go into. And to really make this to bring this into a more manufacturable sense, you can cut this body up. So when I finish form, what Fusion 360 does is once you click on finish form, it's going to convert that T-spline body into a B-rep solid body. So that's what this is now. It's basically going to be a solid body. And now you can use things like combine or split faces, split body to split this into sections to cut certain holes or screw holes into it, and really start to chunk this up to make it more manufacturable.
Yeah, that's awesome. So we I kind of put it out to the group, like what can we show? The thing with sculpting environments is for me, it was really hard to kind of wrap my head around it because so I came from architecture and I jumped straight into Grasshopper, right?
Yeah.
And so I was able to parametrically confine everything, visually with some nodes. And I think the sculpt environment is a lot more similar to what you see in animation or game design and things like that. I mean, it's not the same, but there are similarities. And for some of us who have been working in furniture for so long, there's a lot to it that become, a little kind of workflow change, right? Like you're having to approach it completely differently.
Yeah.
And I kind of posed it to the group, is there something that you would love to see us show here? Or is there something that we're missing in this presentation that would help your workflow a little bit more? And obviously you all keep going with what you're doing, but post it in the chat and we'll either answer it there, or maybe we can just get someone to demo it. And Kaching is making a flying chair right now.
Again, with the bridge tool, I hear you, Trent. Yeah, Alex, did you want to show some of what you did with the lounge sphere specifically?
Sure. I'm happy to show that. Let me see if I can open the file. If not, you will need to drive for me.
Oh yeah, sure. I can do that too.
But no, I have it here. So let me share my screen.
I hope that was useful, you guys. I'm gonna go back into the chat and see if there's any good questions, or are you guys all fielding it?
Yeah, so this is the launcher that we thought about, and this actually it's a very common thing that happens. So Trent and Kaching, the team has been working on the credenza, right? And up until today, that credenza had a very straight base, right? And then imagine that the challenge in here from a client was, well, can we make the base a little bit more organic? So that's what Kaching showed you. But imagine that design is successful, and then the client comes in and says, you know what, we want to expand the line. So what else can we do, right? And that's where the idea of the launcher came to play. One of the things that was being discussed early in the session today was the idea of inserting sketches. And let me show you what I did, at the very first step when I was working on this. So, this is an image of an Eames launcher. When I was thinking about the chair, I was thinking, what will be, some good proportions just to make sure that, I have a piece that is very comfortable. And, if any of you have sat in one of these, you know how comfy they are. So this was a very good way of getting some initial proportions. And again, at this point, everything is very, is very exploratory. That's the way that I'm, looking at this. What you see here is, exactly what Kachin, was talking about. Again, I'm going to show, the process super, quickly, like in this case, what I was creating was a box and kind of, reacting, very quickly. So you see that this is a very simple box that I have. And, if I go here, then I start, let me turn this on again. I just, with modify, I just start taking shapes and, playing with them, right? So I'm making this smaller, I'm moving it around. One of the cool things that I have with this is, just like Kachin showed, if you turn on symmetry. So now I have symmetry. So now I can start with, bigger sections. So for example, in this case, I'm taking, the side legs and then I'm just rotating them. And that's already giving me, a certain, personality for the chair. I can take these top sections and again, I can rotate them.
Yeah.
And just by doing that, you see that there's a lot of, interesting elements. I actually need to remove the symmetry. Okay.
Yeah, there
back
you
in
go.
business. So now I can rotate this. So you see that very quickly you start getting a shape, that you like. Some of the things that, we were talking about, with the proportions, for example, on the side, this is too wide. I can actually take this and start playing with it. Maybe I want one side to be, a little bit wider. And then, the other one, I want to keep it, straight.
Yeah.
So that's one thing that you can do. So you see that now, without much work, you're beginning to get the overall shape, that we had for, for the chair. Sorry, for the legs of the.
Yeah, I like that you went you went with big selections first, kind of like resizing, reshaping, and then getting more into manipulating the edges, manipulating specific faces. That's actually a really good way to approach it.
Exactly. And, I think part of this is that, you start with the general shape, just like when you are playing, with different elements. At first, you just want to get a sense of the general proportions, and those are easier to handle. And once you start getting into some, more defined details, then you can start playing, with different shapes. So you see that I have the general shape in there. Now, I use bridge, to add some of the, to add the hole in the middle. So now I have this shape, and now I'm playing with some of the proportions, on the outer shell. So I'm giving it some thickness, and you see that the continuity, is really nice. For example, one of the things I was, mentioned, this is what I was mentioning to Kachin earlier on, but for example, from the side, I see that maybe this side is too wide.
Oh,
so
okay, I
select
see.
the, this edge, and
Yes.
I play with the proportions. Now I have more control over this. And you see that this control really translates, into the general shape of the leg. So this is, literally taking, just a couple of minutes, right? But then you see all, the impact that you are creating with your shape. So in here, I'm using Crease, not going all the way up. And again, you see a sharp edge, and then really nice continuity, it starts fading into the top sections. So that was the basis for, creating this. Once, we created this section, then we mirrored that, to the other side. So we had, both elements. And then for the ottoman, we just copied the shapes, and then we adjusted, the proportions a little bit.
Yeah.
For the seat, it was basically the same operation. We had one box, kind of like a squarey pillow, if you want to think it that way. Then we copied it, for the back section. And then with Bridge, we connected, the section. So now it's all one continuous, shape. And then for the Ottoman, we did the same. So it's funny that, these objects all came from basically two shapes, one box and then another hollow box that had, that hole in the center.
For sure. Yeah. Someone in the chat said, it goes to show that how a lot of this is comes out of a lot of practice. And I totally agree. It is a lot of practice. You just need to play with it more, understand what the manipulators do. And the more you do it, if you like doing it and the more you do it, the better you're going to get, for sure.
I agree. I mean, I think, for example, when you are playing, Kachin was showing this, there's a lot of difference, between how you move some of these shapes, what happens when you select a vertex versus an edge, a surface. But the key thing is you start playing with it. And many times, starting playing with it without a preconceived notion of what you're going to end up, it's actually better because you don't feel like you did anything wrong. You're like, oh, this is a cool thing. I didn't know I had that in me. And then you continue with what you were doing.
Yeah. The only instance where you may run into some trouble is if you manipulate it and face so much that it overlaps another face. That's when Fusion 360 will be like, I can't convert that because it got overlapping faces.
Yep,
but
definitely.
Yeah.
So let me show you. For example, if I take these lines, I get too greedy, right? So I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm blending the laws of physics. So
hey, that looks pretty cool, though.
Yeah, it actually.
That's what architecture students do year one.
Yes. So now, let's see if I can get away with it. If I click finish form, Fusion will say nope. So finish form is a reality check. That is very useful. And then, you can go back and say, okay, how else can I do it so that, it actually works out?
Yeah.
Yep.
Hey, Alex, can I share my screen real quick? I know we're running, we're getting close to time.
Yep.
But last live stream, I think, Trent, we heard some folks talk about, hey, we want to see some rendering. We want to see a little bit about rendering. So, very quickly, I want to just kind of show how easy it is to get a rendering in Fusion 360. In addition to the credenza and the lounge, I basically grabbed a few other CAD models like speakers and a turntable just to build it out a little bit of like, hey, this is a scene. This is a product line that could be a lifestyle. So under the workspace switcher, there is a rendering workspace, and you go in there. And this is where Fusion 360 does a few things. This is not a render yet. This is only a preview, but it turns off all the edges and it lays an environment behind it. So if you go into scene settings, this is where you can tweak some of those lighting settings, camera settings, materials. Oh, no, not materials, but like environment settings. So if you look at, this is your brightness. There's background environment. There's a number of different environments you can choose from. You can get all these. These are kind of the standard set of environments. And then all you got to do is double click it. And, you can lay a ground plane. You can set reflections. You can change your focal length to camera focal length. So say we want this to be like a 50 millimeter focal length, right? Now it's a little wider. Change your exposure, all those things. And what you can also do here is, if you haven't done it in the design workspace, is choose your different types of appearance materials. So you've got all kinds of materials here, from glass, metal, wood. We've actually have a good amount of like wood finishes. You guys should definitely check that out if you're doing a lot of furniture and using wood finishes. And from there, once you've applied to them, these are basically just a drag and drop. So, this red enamel paint is basically the turntable, but if I wanted a different color, it's a drag and drop. Much like Keyshot, if you're using Keyshot, this is kind of that in similar workflow. You can also drag materials into existing materials to replace ones. So some nice tips and tricks there. But then the way to get the render, there's two types of rendering. There's in-canvas rendering, which uses your local CPU to render. And then there's the render tool that lets you choose between background local, which is the same thing, or cloud rendering. So you can send this to the cloud, have the cloud take care of all the compute so you can do something else and keep working on your Fusion design while it's rendering. Or you can do it locally on your machine. And it's using the same rendering engine in both. So the results are completely the same.
Hey, Kaching. So one of the questions that we've gotten from a couple of people that popped up actually is, how can you put your rendering in an image, right? So say you have a picture of a room and you want to see how it's going to work, or you want to visualize it for your customer, right? Your client calls you up and says, we want to do this. You say, give us a picture of the space. You can do that. I wish I could talk more about things that are coming in the future, but there's some really cool stuff coming. I think in regards to doing that here, you can do an insert canvas command and kind of have it overlaid on an image, or obviously Photoshop. That's one of the things. So Kaching, why don't you go finish up your thought? And then there's actually a question I want us three to have a conversation about live, which is from Hartford. And I will tell you that here in a second.
Yeah, sure. Just very, very lastly, just answering that question, right? When you insert a canvas, right? There's one option that, let me just like quickly show this. There's one option here that shows that lets you pick whether this canvas is renderable. So what that means is this canvas will show up in your rendering if you check this. So again, just to kind of going off of what you were saying, Trent, that is definitely a way that you can do that. But yeah, I'm done. Oh, Trent, you're muted.
It's like totally failing on the mute button today.
Okay.
So basically, I think one of the things that happens a lot is, as furniture designers, manufacturers, or manufacturing businesses that deal with a lot of different types of clients, we're getting calls from industrial design firms. We're getting calls from interior design firms, architecture firms, or if you sell direct to consumer. And every time you're getting an email or a call, which it's pretty dang rare to get a call these days, but every time you get an email, they want to see what it would look like. They want to pre-flight it in their space, or interior design firms are notoriously bad for this, and that they'll basically want you to like do a ton of rendering so that they can put it into their scoping project, etc. And this is a good option for folks to almost have renders available kind of at request. Like, sure, send us a quick pic of your spot, insert it, make it renderable, jump into the render, throw some different types of appearances on there and ship it out. It takes you 10 minutes. I think it's really great. Mm-hmm. So Hartford asked a question that I think it's a really good question. And it's almost Neil Ralph at Olive Wood Turning. We still use phones in the UK. Well, that's good. I'm glad that you still use phones. Anyway, so basically, when to use Sculpt and when to not. And I think it is totally an opinion. I think it's what your workflow is. So Hartford, for my business, we use a lot of surface because only one side is particularly organic, right? And so I actually use surfacing more because it allows me to get a level of, to an extent, parametrically confined organicness, while all the other parts of it are really rigid and planar, right? I think the Sculpt environment in furniture is really good when you take the approach Alex did. If I were to try to model that in the solid model space, it'd be, I won't say impossible because I don't think anything's impossible, but it's damn near improbable. And so I think it's really like, for me, it's choose your own adventure. If you're doing a lot of work like me that has organicness on one side, I think surfacing is really good. I think if you're taking an approach to Alex to actually, my business is driven by manufacturing. Let me put it that way. I'm driven by manufacturing, repeatability, and manufacturability. So I choose to work in surface. When I have worked in just design firms, I don't limit myself to that. I start first with what looks good, what feels good, what's interesting, what's engaging, what pushes the limits, and then let's figure out how to make it. But that's not always the case. So that's my opinion. Alex, I'd love to hear what you think, both as a professional and educator. When do you sculpt and when you don't sculpt?
Right. So I have two thoughts on that. The first one is, how to decide. If I can quickly give you directions or think of how something can be made, then I think, model environment is okay, because then I can say, yep, this is, a straight line of, 8 inches, and then it has a radius of 1 inch. If I find myself beginning to do hand waving, like it's kind of curved, but then it goes into this, that means it needs to be sculpted, because there is no real definition in how this transition is going from one place to the other. So that's kind of my take. If you cannot describe it quickly, it's a good case for sculpting it. The other part is that I feel that it doesn't have to be an and or. I mean, you can start, creating a section that's very sculptural in Sculpt, then, you move it to model, and then you add, straight sections, cuts, holes, etc., etc. If you are not happy with that, you can always go back to Sculpt and tweak it. You can go back and forth as many times as you want. So I don't feel that this needs to be, one or the other. It's actually a lot more fun when you combine both of them.
Yeah, Kaching, what do you think? It's like the long pause. You were like, I was waiting for
no,
something.
I didn't know
really
if you were going to jump in.
profound.
I think that, I'm with Alex there. I think that there is some advantages to Sculpt where if you're trying to conceptualize an idea that's not defined by certain dimensions, or you know exactly what you want, Sculpt is a great way to kind of ideate, right? Ideate those shapes and forms and see it come to life. A lot of our industrial designers that Alex teaches, they'll work on a product and then get it 3D printed and see it and hold it and feel it and see if it actually makes sense to if that concept makes sense. So it's great for that. But also, like, I don't know if you caught earlier when I made that flying chair, the open ends of that body, because the sculpt body is open. An open sculpt body turns into surfaces. They are surfaces. So if you don't close this, if that sculpt body is not watertight, it gets converted into a surface. So that's where kind of that it bleeds into surfacing and how it meshes together. So to Alex's last point, it's I think it's more interesting when you actually use both.
Yeah, it's awesome. So I want to spend a little time just fielding some questions live for anybody. Basically, let's see, Greg Cox, if you can't access a 4-axis or 5-axis CNC, could you split the sculpted armchair leg into 2 halves if symmetrical? Yeah, 100%. So basically my workflow for that would be to essentially do kind of a construction plane and then make a surface, like just a surface on that construction plane, and then split body or split whatever, however you're working, and then you can use a range to then move that to your flat panel for your table. That would be my quickest, and honestly I do that a lot, especially when we're doing drawer faces or door faces. Like if I need to cut something down, I'll just split it and cut it that way.
I've done lamps where we are only using, for example, a CNC router, so we have just 2 inches to play with. So first you kind of plan for that. Yeah, and again with sculpts and some of the surfaces, you are surprised with how much organic elements you can get in 2 inches of thickness. But something that we've done sometimes is that we actually plan to flip, apart. So if we get 2 inches, we do one side, then we flip it, and then, we program the second side. So then we get 4 inches, out of, let's say machining with just a CNC router. So that's another way of getting that, without fancy toys.
Yeah. And I'll also add, actually, Greg, like when I do, and I know that this is a little out of context of your question, but when we do really complex machining ops, let me show you this. So when we do really complex machining ops, what I'm gonna turn on the stock visibility here and kind of show you how we start to block it out in regards to our approach, right? Because you get to a point, but the cool thing is that we could manufacture this on a 3-axis or a 5-axis. We happen to do this on a crazy 5-axis with like 4 feet of travel. But the cool thing is I got bored one day and I programmed it using basically only 2D paths and with a ton of part flips. So I think really you have to just start to get a little creative. And so to the point, like to your question where I said I'd create a surface and split it and then do it that way. So that's one way to do it. The other way to do it is actually to model your stock, basically turn your position on its side, model all your stock, and then do an op 1, flip it op 2, and leave tabs. And then you pop the tabs off and you've got this totally organic shape that only used 2.5 3D tool pathing. So there's a ton of ways to do it. I think Alex's point was really good too. Like, I think maybe Ethan said it too. Like, there's a million and one ways to skin a cat. 100%. I think at the end of the day, like whatever workflow works for your capabilities is best. Like, actually, if you were able to attend the first one, Jonathan made his data set at home in his garage and then used it the next day, and he just used a little carpenter saw. So lots of opportunities to explore too. Let's see. Flipping is the new dividing. Yeah, for sure. I was like, who said that? Oh, it's Alex. Cool. So I'm super curious if there's any other questions. I do want to share that the next two I'm really excited about. So the next one, I'm going to show one of the things we're talking
Brent,
about.
Actually, I saw a question, if you don't mind me,
Yeah, of course.
something very quickly. Someone was asking about how to quickly add details or, like stitching or some, elements. So, I just wanted to show this, and this is a tool that Kachin showed earlier. So imagine that, this is a cushion or maybe a top section of a chair. One of the cool things that you can do with pipe is that you can actually select points in your geometry. So for example, if I select this and let's say that I said this, I don't know, this is like 6 millimeters, and I hit, let me do it again.
Yeah, doesn't just work with sketches, it works with your edges too.
It works with your edges. So in this case, I select this to a round profile. So now I already have a trim in there, just like that. So, this is a cool way for doing this. Not that this is related to furniture, but I'm going to show you, the power of piping. If I wanted to select multiple, sections in here, with round, look at how quickly I'm getting, like a wire effect, that I can use in some other application. So, I just wanted to share that, as a quick tip, for adding some trimmings, to it.
Yeah. I'm glad you remember that question, because I think I fielded it and I was like, I don't think I'm totally answering this question, how they're asking it, but I'm glad you showed it. And also, like, it's such a good reminder too, because when you get into like upholstered things or detailing, people really want to see it modeled. Because when you show up and you didn't model the piping, but there's piping or the stitch is different, that's when, I think Jola Jasnik said it. It's like, no one likes getting calls from clients. Like, so true. I don't want to show up delivering a project, and then especially if I've made 300 of them and the piping is wrong. So taking that perspective that Alex has in modeling everything really helps you mitigate any of that revenue loss or time loss or whatever.
Also they'll say, hey, can you make the logo bigger?
Yeah. So yeah, so true. So so tomorrow we're gonna actually do something that I'm really, really excited about. So if anybody manufactures in-house, they know that custom tools, shaping tools, or custom molding tools, or anything like that can be really challenging. And essentially the workflow historically is you sketch something out, like you draft something, send it to a tool manufacturer, and they'll make you a custom molded tool. But the cool thing is you can make custom tools in Fusion 360, apply them to your tool library so that they never go away, and you always have that profile. So tomorrow, we're actually going to show you, if you were a part of yesterday's, you saw Brad do all of his parameters on a kind of a wine, like a built-in and then like a wine hutch. And a lot of that had some custom molding. We're going to show you actually how to go in and create custom tools. And also, we're going to, let me stop sharing and show this other screen. So for some of those who are talking about kind of manufacturing, we're going to actually show you some manufacturing methodologies to machine this, right? So what would be the best tool paths to use, spiral versus swarf or whatever. And then we're going to show you nesting and fabrication in a range. We showed you a little bit of range yesterday. We'll probably be pretty light on a range tomorrow, but we'll be really deep dive into nesting. And then Friday, we'll be back with Brad Tallis, Jonathan Odom, and myself, and we'll be talking drawings, Fusion teams, you know, looking at Fusion data on your cell phone in front of a client, the whole kit and caboodle. So go ahead and come back tomorrow if you've got any more questions about sculpting or surfacing, or there's a lot of conversations around Class A geometry. I take notes during all of these, and we'll 100% try to organize a bunch of folks around doing more of these that are a little bit more specific to your questions so that you can get that content. But again, thanks for coming. Ka-ching, Alex, thanks for showing up. Thanks for the awesome tutorial. And everybody on the chat, everybody watching, thank you so much for coming. I mean, we really do get a kick out of fielding these questions, engaging with you all, because at the end of the day, we're all just people who make things. And I think we all love chatting with people who like to make stuff. So we're going to close it off there, and I'll see you all tomorrow. And Ka-ching, I think you've got a live stream on Friday on Instagram where you field a bunch of questions and have more of just kind of a conversational office hours type of deal, right?
Yes. Every Friday, I am live on our IG channel, IG account. So yeah, guys, tune in. Basically answering questions, and special guest this week is John Saunders from Saunders Machine Works. He's joining me, and he's gonna answer questions, talk to you guys. So yeah, that'd be fun.
Yeah, if you don't know him, check out NYCNC on YouTube. And we do a lot of work with him. He's got a lot of great learning cam content out there for anybody who wants to explore turning or multi-axis or even just really basic fundamentals. So check it out. And with that, I'll see you all tomorrow, and take care.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, guys.